it's not every day that I get the chance to interview somebody who I've been able to witness some of the results of your work and even see some of the things that you've been doing without actually knowing you at all first. And so today's guest is not an anomaly, but he is anonymous for now. And with that, I want to introduce, do you go by Reaper, Reaper One, or Reaper Consultation?
Generally, Reaper is how we go about it, since we're on page 8 at this point. You know how many different variations of names we'd have to go through. So Reaper's perfect.
Got it. Not to be confused with Nicholas Irving, who I might call my alma mater, but who cares? Now, I'm very excited to announce the first official sponsor of the Redacted Culture Cast. Obsidian Arms is one of those companies that reflects the many facets of gun culture. Not only are their firearms frequently found on competition fields like USPSA and 3Gun, but they are a Minnesota-based, US-sourced original equipment manufacturer. Obsidian Arms makes their own punch and tool kits for the amateur and professional gunsmith out of Little Canada, Minnesota, that come with a lifetime warranty. Whether it is fine parts that require a Swiss machine, or you're in the design phase and are looking for an American machine shop that is in tune with the needs of gun culture, go check out Obsidian Arms at obsidianarms.com. Thank you, and now back to the show. So one of the key elements for you, Reaper, that I've wanted to have a conversation with you about is something that we're going to get into pretty quickly. But if I just pull up a story... There was a gentleman I was having a conversation with who was very kind to invite me out when I was in his neck of the woods. And we were talking about community and culture and this importance of how do we actually make, we are starting to formulate these important ideals that have to do with masculinity and community and independence and decentralization, but there's a difference between the ideal and the execution. And so in that conversation, you were brought up because of the influence that you had had over him moving in a certain direction and then being able to make some choices. Now, because we're not doxing the entire world today, the point of the story is that I knew of what you were doing before I had any opportunity to meet you. And today we've started to remedy that. And if I've followed your Instagram page for a while, which currently at the time of recording is Reaper Consultation, where you have these monthly challenges that include things like building an area study, getting to know who is involved in your local political arena, and paying attention to where the resources come into your area and leave. A key example of that for myself would be something like, I currently live in the desert. Where do we actually get our water from? And so I've enjoyed and I've been encouraged by staying up to date and using to some extent using social media for something other than all the trendy, shitty words that people use, like brain rot now. It's like, no, this is actually productive. I have to save it. I'm going to write some notes and then I'm going to go do it. So if that's not it's not a doxing interview, but it is a introduction. How did I do?
How did you do? As regard to
I've got to. I'm. This is one of those things where, like, I've got to introduce you, and I'm trying to figure out better ways to do it. So,
oh, I like it. It's organic. Cool. Organic's good.
It's good. All right. Well, let's jump right into the meat and potatoes here. Then let's jump right into. So, what was the inspiration for these kind of monthly challenges? How did you get started on them, and where did you come up with the idea, and how do you start building some of your checklists?
So it kind of goes down to the whole philosophy of the page is a lot of guys get this kind of analysis paralysis, or they look at something. I always take the snipers or like guerrillas, and it's shrouded in all this mysticism. In reality, there's a lot of very simple things. There's just a lot of simple things put together. If you kind of deconstruct it to its elements, you can begin to understand really what makes it tick. So doing that, looking at that broader philosophy, the idea was to take little bits of things you could do and just break them down to really simple things, right? You think of like an area study and how energy intensive and information intensive that could be. But if you just add, 2 or 3 things over the course of a month, that's really easy to do. And let's say, I don't know, 10,000 people look at that and say 10 people act on it. Like that's 10 more people who previously were not acting upon that. And chances are they will inspire others to do the same, or they will affect the people they're associated with, and thereby, creating a stronger and more, how would I describe this? Intelligent community. Basically, instead of sitting behind your computer and looking at things and saying, wow, I wish I could go either, do nothing or go full Rambo and we're going to go full kinetic war. And that's that. In reality, like there's a lot that you could do between there that could actually inspire change and make you prepared at the same time. So finding things that are like, hey, what are kind of your most impactful things to know how to do that could either one prepare you the most per action, or things that would be the most impactful for knowing about your area. So it was really just trying to inspire action in the real world instead of just sitting behind your computer and desiring for either all out civil war or just do nothing.
So I'm going to read off August's monthly challenge because we're going to be approaching September here pretty quick. First one is find out who owns your utility companies or who leads them if they are city-led or city-run. The second one is find the National Guard bases in your state. And so this is where you start building a map, kind of identifying where key locations are. Third, meet someone new in your state. Fourth, denote somewhere the average high and low temperatures for every month where you live. And then there's the last two are do the same, but with the record highs and lows. So you know what the average high and low, and then what the record high and low is for each month, which helps you like gear plan because it's going to be 35 degrees out, but it could get as low as 0 or -10. So you might want to have a set of gloves as well for those upper Midwest boys. And then then there's find the fiber optic lines in your 5-mile radius, which that's one that like we're talking about internet here, right? We're talking,
Yeah.
And then finally bury your ammo can cache somewhere off your own property if your property is less than 10 acres. So that last one I actually find I'm finding probably the most entertaining right now because I live near a lot of public land. And so I kind of have a lot of good space to do it. Like I have no excuse not to do that. And so I have to polish up on August. So these kind of goals, these ones are a mix of very physical things. And I get the idea of doom scrolling or whatever doom scrolling, just like consuming social media and the internet and not doing anything about it. But some of these are things that you can do from your computer, and you can start putting together a pretty reasonable, I won't use the word dossier, but body of material that almost works like a local guide for, guerrillas or insurgents, even in that case.
Yeah, pretty much. And even if you didn't write it down, you just started to store this in the back of your head, like you're already better off than you were before, right? Putting it down on paper is the best way. Having it in your head and on paper, even better. But if it's you at least just exposed yourself to that information, you are already one step ahead of where you were before. And if we just keep that principle of Kaizen, right, that 1% improvement each time, we are going to keep building and building and building momentum. And studying virality, that's really how this all works out. It doesn't start overnight, right? We do builds up a little bit. 1 friend does it, 2 friends do it, 3 friends do it. And now everyone and their mother has body armor or an AR-15, right? 8 years ago, we wouldn't have imagined that. And now it's totally normal. I mean, how many guys do I see have nods now, right? So could we do the same with maybe less materialistic things like gear and more knowledge, skills, preparations, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it's been a nice market change away from the pack your bug out bag kind of idea of I'll be critical of the idea of survival real quick, and that's that so much of what you call like the survival prepper community is very steeped in consumerism. It's buy the thing, store the thing, urgency, buy the thing. And I'm not opposed. It's not really that that's something to be opposed to, but it's kind of like having a bunch of supplies but no logistics. You have It's not just about skills, because yeah, the gun culture likes to criticize itself for having the stuff but not being able to do the thing. And ultimately, the problem that runs into is not all of us can go out and be Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Delta Force operators, SWAT cops, whatever, right? You can't all just, the entirety of our hierarchy is not built on, well, even if there isn't a hierarchy, is not entirely built on doing the job right now. And so some of these things, I'm looking at July: find 2 abandoned roads or railroad tracks, find 2 water storage facilities, find the name of 1 criminal organization that's in your city or county. So like these kind of things are things that are they're proactive. They're things that you can do, but you do them. You don't just buy. You're not just buying an ammo can or you're not buying another bunch of food. You're like, oh, okay, this is something that you might do with somebody. And I think that's what has been, I think I've seen the result of this reflected in, oddly enough, people I've met along the road. So
Yeah, just giving them bite-sized chunks to do. It just makes it so much easier than giving them. I mean, you're essentially taking a whole book and then just giving them spark notes and saying, read this. Like, anyone can do that, right? Anyone can read a book. Obviously, it's a willpower thing, a time thing, but you break it down, there's no excuse at that point.
So if you put out, if you, what would you consider a success when you see one of these go out and you put it out for July, and by the end of July, like do you draw metrics on that? Is that a what do you call it?
If one person did it, that's a success in my mind, because it took me so little effort to write this down, and if one person got improved, that's win in my mind. Honestly, anything above that's just extra credit, icing on the cake. I've contemplated, I've done a couple stories kind of seeing how people are doing here and there. And some of that can get skewed because you got, thousands of people who respond to this, or, how many people actually respond to the story. Are they more inclined to, if they do respond to stories, to actually perform actions? Is that selection bias? But, if it's 100 people, like that is stellar, fantastic, because that's only going to compound. So I consider it a win in my mind. I've talked with some people and some businesses because they've offered to like do some type of giveaway for people who can prove they did things, but that kind of gets weird. Like, how do you prove you did certain things versus others? So working out the logistics of that. I think after September goes out, I'll start putting a little bit more thought into how I want to do this going forward. Do I want to repeat some of these things? Because you get new followers, you kind of circle back here and there. Do you want to do a random giveaway for a pool of people who've proven they've done it? Do you want to just do, giveaway, mail a sticker out to everyone who's done it? Obviously that requires money, and money's tight. So like, how do you go about this, right?
Well, I mean, if they're going to have to provide evidence that they've done these, I want all the 10-digit grids of all of the caches. I have 37 caches.
They're all at my grandma's house.
Yeah, right.
That works, right? It's not your property. You've already diversified some of your risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just don't tell her that that's what those are. She might not be happy with that. Yeah. No. Okay. So there is an idea of not necessarily changing it, but you're kind of, it's a growing evolution. And if I'm not mistaken, you started this year, right?
Yeah, this started, I want to say August, July. think May or June.
Mm-hmm.
I just get I get irritated by learned helplessness when people are like, well, I don't know what to do. It's like, you have the Library of Alexandria on your phone, right? Figure it out. But
Explain that. Explain what you mean specifically by learned helplessness in this scenario.
so let's what's a good example? Recent example, I saw Bruiser Industries talking about ghillies and how he sees a lot of photography of people wearing ghillies in ghillie suits that are ungarnished. So it's just basically a mesh cloak with a grid of 550 cord, nothing's on it. Typical ghillie, you'll put vegetation on, fake vegetation, garnish, etc. Some type of dress to make it look like a bush or a shrub, or just totally melt in with the environment. Some of the comments I see are, but where do I learn this? If you've been following the page for a while, you know that there are 1,000 books on the subject on the internet, YouTube. You could buy books on eBay. You could buy field manuals for snipers. Like, there's information out there. There are actually books dedicated to the subject. But the thought never goes out to even just type into a simple Google search. It's basically like the elephant and the, like the rope. Basically, an elephant grew up with a rope. And when it was a baby elephant, it couldn't pull itself off the rope. It was basically a circus elephant. But once it got bigger, it could break that rope. But it grew up in such a way that it learned that when it was a baby, it couldn't break that rope. But now it's taken that same context into its current environment. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. So in the story, it makes sense. You're explaining to me what learned helplessness is, and in the story, a young elephant is chained up or tied up, and eventually the rope doesn't even, if I'm not mistaken, like the rope isn't really even just staked down. It's like, it used in the beginning that it's like a baby elephant with a chain or something, and no matter how hard it pulls, it can't get out. But eventually it essentially quits and gives up, and then accepts that the rope binds him, and so you can just take a stake and shove it in the ground. I've never trained elephants. I don't know about it, but I get the concept. But how would you see that applied in people? Because the explanation makes sense from a story standpoint, but where do you see it happen?
So you could take, what drills do I do for shooting? How do I meet people? How do I meet my neighbors? The most basic of fundamental human tasks is socializations. We are tribal creatures. And you have to teach people how to interact with each other, right? You have to ask people to network. That the idea that you cannot be Rambo, solo man, lone wolf, save the world, Batman, that's just not a thing. And not only getting that through someone's head, but getting it through that they need to go out into the world and meet actual people and learn about what they like to do and talk with them and socialize and network. And getting pushback from that, or just, why would I need to do this? I don't know how to do this. It's just this, it's definitely a modern cultural thing. And I'm trying to find the word to describe it, but the idea that there is no motivation, motivation is not the right word. That wouldn't be the good way to describe it. There is a lack of motivation in some circumstances, but the idea that they just can't do that. They just can't learn that. It's impossible. It's impossible to learn long-range shooting. It's impossible to learn cyber skills. It's impossible to learn what the military does. It's impossible to learn how to create a network. It's impossible to create an intelligence, network. Like, it's not possible. And the idea that it's like illiterate guys in mud huts have figured this out in Afghanistan, and a dude in a first world country with the internet at his fingertips who can look up anything he wants to learn anything he wants to on YouTube, the internet, and even if it's not the best information, could at least take the first step into learning, but refuses to either do that or does not even realize that that is an option. That the phone is just for, as you said, doom scrolling, entertainment. It's not a learning device.
So can I I think I'm splitting two things here. One of them is there's one person. I'm going to use some caricatures. There's one person who is resistant to the idea,
Yes.
the goal, whatever it is. Whether it's okay, you've determined that you want to start getting to know your neighbors. We'll use that example. You move into a new neighborhood. You're trying to become familiar with your surroundings. One person will say, I don't need to know anybody. Why would I? They're not pertinent to my life or whatever. And that person I don't think is fitting into this equation. I think that's a very different person than somebody saying, yes, but I don't know how. Which the danger, though, I think, is there's a third dark middle, which is somebody who says he doesn't know how, but he's using that as an excuse to just not do it.
Yes. I think that is a great example. That's a great way to define it, because I have seen all three of those now that you bring up that third one. There's a lot of arrogance and mental weakness, in my opinion, regarding all of that in all three.
Yeah, well, I think the reason why I'm bringing up these distinctions is because, the one on the one side, the character who says they're trying to figure out how to do the things, but they don't know what to do. Like, fair. They might not have knowledge, but they have courage, or they might be looking for finding a direction to move in, which is still somehow different than actually moving in a direction. There's an odd thing about traveling is you figure out where you want to go once you start moving, but not until you get out. And that's a weird way of saying something like you figure out the other books you want to read when you start reading. You're like, oh, okay. So you have to start somewhere to get somewhere, which the first step solves the hardest, insert a series of tropes. But that is to be separated from, I don't think you can help a person who doesn't want to be helped, and that's even the worst way of saying it. Like in the gun culture, there are people who are not interested in participating. Let's call it. And it's not really that they're in the gun culture, but they're in our world, in our environment, in our greater expanse. They're just not really interested in participating. And some of them are just basically retired, and that's fine. But some of them are more like, yeah, they have the lone wolf mentality. Then I think the dangerous one is to be saying you don't know what to do, but really you're using that as a mask to refuse to move.
Yes.
So how then? So these just even as simple as these small factors. What are you aiming at when? What is it that you're aiming at when you write these and when you put this stuff together and you're trying to think of like equipping someone for what?
So let's kind of circle back and then we'll get there. So, with the group who has the courage, right? There's people who want to learn, but maybe they're just legitimately, due to the education system of society, just like, I have no idea where to start. Like, I want to start, but paralysis analysis, I don't know where I should take my first step.
I have to interrupt that one real quick. Let's take someone, like, it's a very easy example when you're looking at someone's like, oh, I want to build my first AR-15. Like, dude, do not go to Reddit or do not go to the internet. Like, you are going to just get hosed with like a billion opinions that are all, you don't even have the qualifiers to engage in that. And maybe you should, but you get my point. Like, I have sympathy for that person, because let's go back to the ghillie suit. Which manuals do I read? How many do I have to read? When do I have read them? Right?
Yeah, which is fair. It's fair. And this is, the kind of like the gentle push of like, just go start somewhere. It doesn't matter where. You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And you can leverage those people, and you can leverage the people who are in the know to address the people who have, malice might not be the right word for this, but who are hesitant, right? We say we're about this, but in reality, we're the immovable rock. And you can create this dichotomy where you can pitch them together in everyone's heart, right? If they know that they want to prepare for conflict, unrest, that some type of action would need to be taken, right? And one group accepts that reality, the other group somewhat denies that anything needs to be done. And if you pitch them together, you can kind of create the join the crowd effect and a little bit of cyberbullying to showcase to others and other observers kind of what's going on, and basically create your own story. This is I'd have to find the chapter in Beautiful Trouble that's on that, but you're basically almost creating a play for an observer with two parties who you know are going to participate. So, taking this forward, it's creating a viral effect. So, right, we're creating this play where two people are, one is resistant, one's totally on board. We saw that with a lot of the kind of go meet your neighbor posts. And since then, the hesitant side has completely shut up, which is great. Because you kind of basically cyberbully them to the idea, and it might seem malicious with the idea of kind of a psychological manipulation, but if you're engaging in a toxic behavior or something that is holding yourself or others back, depending on how we approach this, it might not be a bad idea to use a little bit of constructive bullying. Going forward, though, creating a viral effect where certain people engage in this, who talk to their friends about it, who showcase this online, or engage in other people they may or may not have met in the public area of discourse, starts to bring to the larger consciousness that there are other things we could be doing besides just one reload ones on the range, right? Besides just L-shaped ambush drills, like starting to bring things to a higher level and a greater understanding of the large scope of what is preparedness and conflict. If that makes any sense.
It does, but I think it needs some, it does to me, because I think of recent material that I've been engaging in. Quite a short description would be: there's a difference between knowing how to there's a difference between being skilled at reloading a rifle, your one reload one. There's a difference between that and being able to execute a basic battle drill like react to contact or ambush. There's a difference between being able to set a strategy for at least you and your family or your community for the next 3 years.
Yes.
So I think there's actually a danger here within. Let's just talk about even the conversation on training. Is that okay? But we're gonna. Well, I think it applies to training, but we're gonna apply it to gear first. Oh, you got your first rifle. Well, you don't have a plate carrier. Oh, you have a plate carrier. Well, you don't have a belt. Oh, you have a belt, but you don't have a. Oh, you've got a rifle and a plate carrier. Okay, well, the next thing is nods. Okay, now you've got those things and you've learned how to use them. Now you got to go shoot 3-gun. Now, okay, you learned how to shoot 3-gun or whatever. It just the thing is there's always one more step, which is on the one hand not a bad thing, in the sense that we can always progress in some direction. But the other side of it is, at some point in time, you have to realize that there is a loading bar or an individual development, and then there's a kind of a progression in value. To the progression in value is a pretentious way of saying you can get good at one reload one. You can become proficient in how to do a react to contact or a near ambush, but both of those all fit within the context as you're trying to expand your ability to act and plan more in a more broad sense without losing all the details in between, because no one likes an officer who can't do land nav. So yeah. I think that's where I'm seeing the difference here.
Yeah, I would describe it more as zooming out, not being as myopic. We like to think of things always, not we, but always think of things right in the heat of a battle, right in the heat of a firefight, right in the heat of a self-defense shooting, and not looking at what events lead up to that, what events lead after that, what events lead between two different acts. Yeah. What does it look like from start to finish, whether that be 1 year, 10 years, or even, God forbid, 100, right? Because that's what you could be talking about. How many guerrilla wars have been going on for decades now? So starting to think past yourself and past just your friend group, past your family, and just like, what could the range of possibilities be? Because we can't predict the future. We can try our best, but foresight's 50-50. And if we at least diversify our skill set and our knowledge set somewhat more, we're more, a Swiss Army knife isn't the greatest knife, but it's a damn handy tool to have, in most situations. Look at any guerrilla conflict. They're not really good shooters. I mean, the IRA, PIRA, and associated groups made like 30% of their sniper shots on a good day, and they were feared, right? So think about that. Like, if you took, Joe Schmo and put him out there, he'd probably do a hell of a lot better than that if he's from America, right? Because he's handled a rifle, etc. So the average American can handle firearms pretty good, but we, despite being in an age of quote unquote interconnectedness with the internet, we are so isolated. We are so divided that we think our neighbor's just out to get us. And maybe they are, but the inability to even interact with them and put on a good face for them is just further complicating matters. Look at the COVID reporting hotlines in Minnesota, Stasi reporting lines, the Soviet Union's reporting lines. Like these, like if your neighbor doesn't like you or they are antagonistic to your views, not interacting with them is only putting more fuel in the fire, because you're only giving them more reason that they shouldn't care to turn you in, right? Only more reason to snitch on you. Not knowing the people around your town only gives them more reason to be suspicious when you're in an area you haven't typically frequented, right? It's more people who can't go to side with you when you are in a time of trouble, whether that's legal matters or just economic matters or anything, right? So broadly, this is only one part of the challenges, but networking is just so huge, and I cannot overstress this of how important it is. I mean, look at any group, right? Tooth to tail ratios between 1 to 10 and 1 to 30, right? For every fighter and door kicker, there's 10 to 30 people standing behind them, whether they're in the know or not, associated to assist their cause.
Tooth to tail, we're going to use the military as an example. For every one infantryman, there's going to be 30 other guys that are running the food, running the supplies, running the AC, running. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I describe it as simple as babushka down the street just telling you what she saw yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
The clerk giving you letting you take some food without scanning it. Right. Like little things. It doesn't have to be like, oh, our whole group gets together and I got like 5 intel guys here, I got my 5 logistics guys here. It could be like, oh, here's my aunt. She's gonna, run us some water while we're out on the roof observing a riot, right? Something like that. It doesn't have to be super high speed. You
mentioned the book Beautiful Trouble. Are we talking about Andrew Boyd and Dave Mitchell?
Yes. Yeah. It's got the megaphone on it.
Okay. And this is a book that you'd recommend reading?
I would generally treat it not like a cover to cover read. You can read it like that, but something you read a chapter one day, read another chapter another day, just because it's more of a playbook or guide, so to speak. That's really what it is. I did get a little pushback on that because they're like, it's a leftist Marxist book. I'm like, cool, you should know how they work.
There's a problem that the left and the right seem to be facing right now, as far as and we're going to talk about, there's a friend of mine who made a statement that he says that he sees that the right views violence as a binary. It's either it is or it isn't.
Yes.
Whereas the left views the war as a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry, the left will see violence as kind of a spectrum.
Yes.
And what this seems, and then if you like, as I've read The War of the Flea, and I've read a couple of other books, Counterinsurgency, and as I've been delving into this idea of, culture as an attack vector for war making, I think what I'm starting to see though is that the side in this kind of war that tends to be winning is the one where its members all believe in a thing. They're not all individual automatists. Well, they're decentralized on one level, but they're addressing something that is more foundational than the urgency of the moment. The insurgent, not urgency, the insurgency of our day and age. We look at the Black Lives Matter movement. It was very effective in mobilizing people to cause damage. It was very effective in mobilizing people, but it didn't necessarily train excellent fighters. You look at similar movements in that kind of category. The people there are true believers. They believe in whatever the thing is that they're there for, likely, or they're there for the party. But the individualistic right wing or reactionary approach to it is like, well, I need to be a sniper. Like, no one cares about a sniper when your house is on fire.
Yes.
So, and your house is going to be on fire because you not because you haven't made any friends. I don't think that's the case. It's that, well, your insurance is in your community, and it's going to take a little humility to figure that out.
Yeah, that's something you mentioned the spectrum, and that's something I've been pushing a little bit, is that it's not 0 or 100. There are 1,000 steps in between there, right? Think of simple sabotage is a great example. Was it? There's a book on that, is Sabotage, Sedition, and Subversion. I might get those words mixed up in the order, but that essentially you can do certain things that don't warrant a violent response. For example, if you are building a golf course over the most pristine land, and I disagree with that, I could, for example, salt or bleach your greens. And while that might warrant an investigation, they wouldn't warrant shooting me. And it'd be very difficult to find out who that was. Something like that, right? That is one step, totally nonviolent way to resist. You could think, for example, a group that is, say, planning an economic policy that is detrimental to your community, and you walk in there with alarms tied to balloons, and you let those go free to interrupt the meeting and make it a pain. So they have to get all these balloons down with these beeping alarms going down. That was actually used during I think it was an oil meeting in France, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong what that was, but things like that. They're just little mischievous things that, you can't, that doesn't warrant a violent response. At most, maybe an arrest and a misdemeanor, but that inspire some amount of action, create a little bit of publicity. Because if you're just sitting back doing nothing, no one really gives a shit. Whereas if you do something, even if people disagree with it, you spark a conversation, right? Any publicity is good publicity in some sense. And you notice that with leftist tactics, like how effective they are in getting what they want. Now, some guys will go, well, they're astroturfed, and frankly, it doesn't matter. They're getting what they want, right? Even if they are funded on some degree, or even a large degree, the actions are what is inspiring a lot of the change. So taking plays out of their playbook and adapting them to your moral compass and to the end goals you desire or within your values, you could see some of the same results.
So how does this fit into a moral system? Because you can jump to tropes pretty quickly, like, well, you have to fight fire with fire. Like, I mean, that is a circumstantially convincing situation, or circumstantially convincing phrase. It is not a universal moral ethic.
Correct.
Do do unto others as you would have others do unto you is a universal moral ethic. You have to fight fire with fire is not.
Correct. Burning down people's houses because, someone you loved got killed probably isn't going to win people over, and definitely does not, at least with me, align with my religious and moral views. So discretion is necessary, but understanding that some of the broader tactics, broader strategies can be applied once you adapt them within your moral framework.
Do you think there's a part that's missing? Because we're still talking on the level of strategy, but what we're dealing with is something on the level of ideology. Like, Insurgency's primary motive is revolution. It's not.
Yes.
It's in revolution. runs itself on the belief and hope that the revolution can be successful. So it's sort of it can become a little bit of a self-licking ice cream cone or a self-fueling fire. But, and I'll use that but rather specifically, there is a difference between the intent of the insurgency and the thing that keeps it running.
Think on that for a second.
There's a difference between the moral objective and the strategy meant to get there. And if the strategy the strategy, the tactic, or the method meant to get there betrays the moral ethic, then it's a loss. It's a loss. It's not because your moral values are what drive you to do things, or well, they should at least. And so the kind of conundrum of the king who has to kill his people to save them isn't saving them because he's killing them. He's if he has to destroy his entire population to keep them alive, or that's a contradiction, because you would be destroying everybody, or you have to become the bad guy to fight the bad guy. Well, no. The bad guys are people who do evil things. Like, there's a difference between a war where people don't understand who's on which side and there's conflicts and there's issues. There's a difference between the idea that you've got a conflict between people and there's a decent amount of misunderstanding and a lack of humility involved. There's a difference between that and like fighting the orcs in Lord of the Rings.
Well, the intricacies of everyone's personal motives.
Yes.
I mean, we could look at that. We could take the American Revolutionary War. Hamas is actually a great example, where the goal of an insurgency from the leadership standpoint is actually to control violence and minimize it. A lot of agents of such an insurgency generally will pursue much more aggressively or much more personally than is either A, necessary, or B, beneficial to the organization. So Hamas actually lost a lot of control of their agents about a decade ago, where they were just pursuing violence after violence after violence, killing civilians, et cetera, et cetera. And it was becoming detrimental to the larger organization, to the point where the leaders trying to control them had basically lost control of the agents, and the agents were just doing whatever they wanted. Similarly, in the South during the American Revolutionary War, you saw a lot of kind of neighbor versus neighbor crime. You hurt my horse 10 years ago, so now I'm going to burn down your house because I'm with this group that has lots of guns. So we deal with the larger perceived ideology and perceived goal of the group versus kind of individuals' motives. And then you could tie that into, the accidental guerrilla, whereas most people participating in an insurgency and guerrilla movement are generally not ideologically motivated. They're more personally motivated. The classic example is, we are a family, they bomb our house, everyone dies but you. You are now motivated to participate in a kind of scheme of revenge against those who took your loved ones, versus being, I am ideologically aligned with the communist Marxist movement, the libertarian movement, or the Islamic fundamentalist movement, right? That study was done, Accidental Guerrilla, Kilcullen, I believe it was.
Yeah, Kilcullen's the same one who wrote Counterinsurgency.
Mm-hmm. I haven't gotten to that one yet. But, perceived ideology of the group, take the American Revolution. I mean, how many of the founding fathers didn't get along with what they thought would be the ideal? But they did settle that American independence, generally, I think there was a few dissenters in that who spoke, but generally American independence was the ideal, and that kicking the British out, and the British were the bad guys, and those aligned with them, right? They had said a general vague direction in a enemy. They had identified their enemy, so that way, despite all their differences, they could at least settle on those two things.
Do you think the founding fathers had a vision for the country that do you think that it's too broad of a question to answer quickly, but do you think the founding fathers had a vision of the America they wanted to create, or were they just tired of getting their were they just frustrated too much with their lack of representation in the English government.
I think looking at the intricacy of it, the average person was just frustrated and over it. Like not anything, but most things would be better than what we have now. Get them out. We'll set out the details later. I'd have to pull out some of the writings, but some of the founders were very, very well versed and think more on the intellectual side of like, hey, how do we organize things? I mean, looking at American government structure is loosely based off of a Presbyterian church government, right? We have the Congress, congregation, we have the executive, which is the minister, and then we have the judicial, which is the presbyters, and all kind of hold each other accountable. And given that about 50% of the revolutionaries were Presbyterian, it kind of clicks. But, they were, despite, you had your Presbyterians, your Lutherans, your Congregationalists, I think there's a few Baptists, might have been Connecticut, even a few Roman Catholics, I think, made about 1% to 2% of the revolutionaries. So there's some theological differences, but at the end of the day, they settled like, hey, it's not that big of a deal. These guys are taxing us. These guys are, imprisoning us. They shot us at Boston. They're using corporations to basically impose their will, trying to basically do with the Dutch East India Trading Co. what they do with the British East India Trading Co. in India, controlling trade, trying to control every facet of their life. And they settled that these guys are the enemy, and our general direction will be independence with our own form of organization and government. So a general direction and a pinpointing the enemy.
Yeah. So there was that. I know that was a bit of a derailing, but I wanted to kind of tie it back in because it applies to this accidental guerrilla. I've had the opportunity to read Kilcullen before, and Counterinsurgency was an academic book, but I enjoyed it for what it was. Not saying that I don't enjoy a good academic piece of academia from time to time, but it felt like a book that was trying to define something that the author knew and understood very well, but is very easy to obfuscate with a million other problems. Like, you have to be able to distinguish between insurgency and someone being unhappy about taxes. So those are two different things.
Well, and at the end of the day, if their goal is to inspire some kind of change, whether it's at a personal level or a large scale level, would it, from a more utilitarian perspective, would it matter? Whether we take a kind of observer's point of view or the state's point of view, the state's like, anything that stands against me should be destroyed, quelled, or controlled.
So are you saying that the term insurgent is not like the term terrorist, that implies some sort of moral negativity? Like the term terrorist does not have a freedom fighter mentality to it. It's not a neutral term. It's a morally loaded term.
Terrorists using fear to impose political will or political change, and can imply to more than just an individual or group, but a very large organization. I do not believe insurgent has a moral connotation to it.
Fair. So insurgency-like actions are themselves judged on their morality by the context and the character of the individuals.
Yes.
Fair. I think that is a step that needs to be taken. Recognizing, because you see this issue with the use of force, like, oh, violence is bad, except for when all of our superheroes do it, and all of our hero characters do it, and all of our whatever. And it's like, well, we don't actually believe that. We just don't like it.
Yeah, or violence is bad, except when it's used against people I don't like.
Yes, fair enough. That is the shortest way to that answer.
Yeah, and it definitely has a stigma due to propaganda. We got out of GWAT, and you're used to hearing in Iraq the insurgents, and you just connotate it with terrorism.
Yeah, well, that, and then now you see it politically with like the insurrection, like the January 6th insurrection. It's just careful there.
Yeah, I think watering down those words, I forgot what the term is. I could look it up. I did a freaking post. I should know better. But basically, the overuse of certain terms and words. Think of the term white supremacist, right? It got used for everything, and now that and racism is so watered down that
Yep.
how few people actually care anymore. We've taken away the impact of such a word. If you do that with insurgent or guerrilla, it just becomes another word, right? I mean, how many people joke? You see posters, stickers, even some posts that are like, hey, support your local guerrilla. And while it's kind of a meme, at the same time, kind of gets into your head. You're like, hey, if someone put enough of these up around the country, it would kind of get the message that this is just another word. It means nothing, right? So that when someone sees it on the TV, their social media feed, it loses the impactfulness it would have had beforehand. You've kind of taken the air out of the enemy's words.
So let's go back to a number of books that you have read and that you've talked about. So we just in conversation here, we've already talked about The Accidental Guerrilla. We've also talked about, what was another one?
Beautiful Trouble.
In Beautiful Trouble. I have that note. I thought there was a third one, but maybe I'm wrong. What are some books that might be that you've read that made a pretty solid impact on you that sometime, and then if you need a further qualifier that might oftentimes get missed?
I wouldn't say get missed, but War of the Flea is just such a great one. That insurgency, guerrilla warfare is inherently political. I always pushed for a while there, Fry the Brain. A big reason for that was understanding, well, there's quite a bit of information that's askew, off, or wrong in there. The general idea of that was to open up the horizons of what a single individual is capable of behind a rifle. So I was a big fan of that one. Swamp Fox was one I quite enjoyed, learning the history of Francis Marion, seeing who a true leader looks like, and how just a few guys, 20 to 50 guys can hold up thousands of men. That was super interesting. And Francis Marion was an inspiration, if I remember correctly, for T.E. Lawrence, Shea. I want to say even Mao mentioned him a few times. So, here's these guys who, despite their moral standing being atrocious, they had a massive impact on the world, and they quoted this guy's actions. And I think that's fantastic from the sense of just being able to gather that information. What was another one? Kilcullen had another book. What was it? Out of the Mountains?
That might have been it.
It was the one where he talks about the urbanization and literalization of warfare. His first chapters kind of sucked, but his general idea, I think, could have been condensed. But it was interesting to see that he's basically showing that warfare is getting more urbanized than literal. It's getting more towards the sea, more into the cities. So that was a decent one. I'd have to get my library out, but I gave away half my books. But Phantom Soldier is another good one, kind of breaking down how tactics have worked for irregular warfare groups. I think the Iwo Jima portion was fascinating.
It is called Out of the Mountains.
Out of the Mountains. Let's see. What are some other good ones? Because there's plenty of books you read and you're like, might have been okay to read, but I wouldn't really push this. I think looking for the easiest to read, most impactful books is the greatest place to get people started. I think War of the Flea and Phantom Soldier are kind of those two that I push.
And Phantom Soldier, I was looking for Out of the Mountains. That one was who?
Out of the Mountains. I think that was Kilcullen.
And no, Phantom Soldier.
Phantom Soldier, that was Poole. Poole's a good writer. He's very easy to read.
Poole?
Yes. I think it's John Poole.
Yeah. I think I have read
New Generation of War was an interesting read. I forgot who wrote that one. But he kind of ties into unrestricted warfare. Those were some good ones. Read those years ago.
Yeah, I think this is where part of it comes out in that that's a horrible transition. That's a really, really bad way of saying it. when we think of unrestricted warfare, when you think of that phrase and that concept, what does that elicit in your mind? What do you mean by unconstrained or even there's movies coming about it, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare.
Mhm. So, unrestricted warfare was written by two Chinese generals in the late 90s. It was an analysis of how America approached conflict, and they really cited a lot of the Gulf War and how they could basically counteract America through different warfare means without engaging them directly through the type of warfare that America liked to fight. Iraq wanted to fight in more of a maneuver warfare style. Well, in that case, generally the bigger army wins, and America have, many tanks, bombs, etc., wipes Iraq off the face of the map. So in the book, they posit a couple hypotheses of how they could approach things. So they talk about psychological campaigns, lawfare, economic warfare, biological warfare. They talk about the possibility of using getting genes and creating a gene weapon that could target only certain individuals. They talk about engaging with laser-based devices that can create propaganda in the sky and using that to target individuals. Those who are familiar with the conspiracy theory of Project Bluebeam, it kind of ties into that. I'm pretty sure those two are actually tied together. But just kind of going unhinged with no morals. How could we engage someone and win a conflict with them without them possibly even knowing they're in a conflict, or by the time they figure it out, it's too late.
And you've read this one?
Yes.
Okay, and the title is Unrestricted Warfare, or is it New Generation of War?
Two separate books.
Okay.
Unrestricted Warfare is written by the Chinese generals. New Generation of War, I forgot his name. He kind of talks about how warfare is starting to change and kind of go back to the old ways.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad that I'm encountering you have read some of these books, because I can't help but see that warfare is not going to be tanks and bombs and drones anymore. It's perpetually, not perpetually. It's changing. Even to call it war, to say that warfare is changing is even too. It's too constrained of a language to try to extract the argument that's being made. What we have to, I can say is what I can start with is the era of von Clausewitz is coming to an end, where warfare was formal and declared. There was a beginning, there was an end, there was a team and another team, and all of that is going away because you can't do that anymore.
Correct, because you're big players. That's the rules they've set out, and if you play by their rules, you're playing against the house, and you're going to lose.
Well, America, no. Let's see them. No, like, yes. On the one hand, if Somalia wanted to go to war against America, in a von Clausewitz sense, it would be a one-day war.
Yes,
that's it. It would just be boom. But that is only if they tried to go to war against the United States in a von Clausewitz sense.
Correct.
Now, the same thing, the difference between the early part of the Iraq War and the length of the Afghanistan War is that the Iraqi army attempted to fight America like an army, and the Afghan conflict attempted to fight America. This changed over time. I'm just using these as generalities.
Yes.
Not as a maneuver warfare strategy, but as an insurgency and a guerrilla. They had people who influenced the ground and people who came from the mountains and fought against the Americans. So that being the case, the new what this issue with warfare changing, that for all intents and purposes, both really loud and really noisy, because you get a lot of terms that are kind of colloquially used, the fifth generation warfare, or even this one, unrestricted warfare, economic war, biological war. Like, if everything is war, nothing is war, and this isn't Warhammer 40K to make a joke. But the second side of it is that it's not purely the governments that are the targets anymore. It's not the Kingdom of France or the American government. It's, well, no, I want your people to,
or the participants, I might add, because a lot more people are coming back to the table to play the game. You have, states.
Interesting.
You now have non-state actors that are ideologically motivated. You have criminal organizations, think of cartels, etc., more profit motivated black market type of things. And then you have corporations now doing such things. You're just kind of getting back into the area of the Dutch East India Co., right? You have all these PMCs doing these things. You have, was it? I mean, we can consider an accident, but at the end of the day, how many people have died trying to testify against Monsanto? 2 guys mysteriously die against testifying against Boeing. Maybe an accident, but at the end of the day, we do know that something like Coca-Cola has hired death squads before. ExxonMobil has done that. Like, it's not unheard of for corporations to use violence at this point, right? And then there's us. So it's all these people fighting for basically us, fighting over the mind of the people, because the human capital is really what they're fighting over. General Flynn kind of had a definition of 5th generation warfare. I have my own. I say it kind of waters everything down, as you pointed out, but every place is a battlefield. Everything is a weapon, and every person is a combatant.
So this is
not to be taken too literally, but more in the sense that, like, there aren't the typical limitations that there were before. Your water system's now a weapon to be used against you. You could talk about maybe it's fluoride or poisoning it so that it kills you or hurts you.
Well, didn't the FDA just come out and admit that fluoride in the water lowers the IQ on consumers by about 3 to 4 points?
The National Toxicology Program published that in 53 studies, basically the low average that it in the sense that it reduced no less than 3 to 5 IQ points in children.
No less.
If I remember reading that correctly. If someone wants to correct me on that, but that's what I remember reading. Sodium fluoride is used as a varmicide.
Yeah. Once again, you can. I'm not coming at this from a chemist position or a biologist in that sense. Not to go full Ketanji Brown Jackson or whatever, but what I am saying is, yeah, we know that there are chemicals that are, when used in a certain moderation, don't produce the effect than they do when you take them in a certain excess. But there's this study that's come out from that it has had an impact on the people who use it. Well, there you go. That makes sense. It's a data point. It's a data point that can be used. So where I think it gets muddy, and this is where I think this issue of what we call 5th generational warfare goes awry, is particularly in the sense of, well, then how do you determine intent? And then if everyone can be involved, but I'm going to use a reference. I'm going to use the John Wick movies.
Mm-hmm.
The John Wick movies went from being interesting and having this sort of spy thriller killer ultra super gun guy movie to kind of bland the moment you had the scene where John Wick is talking to whatever his name is in a park, and I think it was he's talking to the owner of the hotel, the guy who's in charge of the hotel. I forget his name for whatever reason. And the guy like snaps his fingers or answers his phone or says something, and everybody in the park stops and leaves. And it's this moment where it goes from the John Wick character is a part of this secret underground world where people are there's a mechanism for how that crime works. You have to follow the rules of the Continental. You pay with gold. There are these not titles and names, and there's this sort of reputation that follows characters to, oh no, everyone's a spy now. Everyone's a spy. Everyone's involved in it. The thing is, and why that scene, I think, kind of flattened the genre, is because, well, then what is the intent of all of those people? What are they doing? What is their and if you can't determine direction, intent, objective, goal, movement, then you're going to create analysis paralysis again. Well, I could find out anything, and that it becomes a ripe, fertile ground for conspiracy theories. And I'm using this as a metaphor, and I know I'm using this as a metaphor because the challenge that I run into with this idea that, yes, not necessarily, this is not an overt criticism, but it's a challenge in the sense of, well, yes, everything could be used as a tool. It's not that everything is being used as a tool.
Mhm.
Everyone could be a combatant. It doesn't mean that everyone is participating meaningfully. And and so everything can, like, the unrestricted warfare is open, but that means that the most important thing that I can focus on is intent. Who is doing what? Because if it's just everyone's doing everything all of the time, that is the operational version of analysis paralysis, because there's no movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and it's you're pointing out the issue that everyone's running into is there's so much I describe it as fog of war. It's like I can't even tell who's acting against me anymore. Right? I can't even tell
I think
who's
is
behind the
true.
screen. You know, is a person who reposts a piece of propaganda or fake news or something like that, are they now an agent? Right? If they do it a couple times, are they now an agent? If they're unknowingly participating, right? If I donate to an organization I think is helping people, but it's used to funnel money, am I an agent or am I just a victim, right? If I kind of know, but deny reality before my eyes, am I an agent? What is, how do we even begin to define intent? Or can I take things prima facie, try to simplify them and declare them an enemy? Is that, that's also morally vague as well. Yeah, where do you draw that line, right? Because it used to be, before, if you attacked me, it was an attack, and we're going to war. But now, if you hack my bank account, take my money, or do we have to go to war now? Right? If you shoot down my satellite, do I have to now kill your people? Like, there's no line anymore.
I think this is the danger, but this is also the frontier, and it's not meant to be like a downer. Really, doesn't need to be a crushing blow. It's that's the world that we live in now. Okay, now figure it out. Like, yes. There's a phrase that you had said before we started recording, was that you're not going to allow Rome to burn on your watch, or something like that. And it reminds me of the same mentality of, yes, I can. I'm sorry, it doesn't remember. These two things sound like they're connected, and I'm wondering if I caught that or if I'm off base.
No, we're starting to tie them together, right? I'm not going to watch Rome burn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every generation has had some new struggle that they had to figure out, right? You think of the guys in World War II. They had just gotten, automatic weapons had just come around. I mean, we could talk about how they're in the Civil War, but, in mass, right? We have aircraft, we have maneuver warfare, and everyone's figuring this shit out, right? That's what their struggle was. World War I, we have chemical weapons. Tanks have now made their intro. Airplanes have made their intro. We're doing trench warfare, kind of maneuver warfare on certain fronts, right? They're figuring out their struggle. Going through like the 60s to 70s, the whole, now an organized group can take on a state. States are no longer the monopoly on violence. They're now being challenged to that. And ours is dealing with the whole of fifth generation warfare, whether it's AI and propaganda. I mean, that is a whole podcast episode of itself. How many different sides and agents there are. Look at what's a good example. How many proxies like Russia would have or America would have for a certain side, right? Ukraine is basically fighting America's war right now. In all essence, I mean, they're recruiting everyone from abroad to go fight the war. And that's typical classic American fashion, is let other people fight the war you want to fight, and then you come in later and clean up the mess. But there are so many things we have to struggle with. At what point, with a boot on your neck, taxation, watching, pedophilia become normalized, at what point do you say enough is enough? And what does your response actually look like? Right? Is it 0 and 100, like the light switch, like you mentioned, or is there a spectrum we can operate on? And these are answers I'm trying to find, and some things I can find historical analogs of them working, I will promote. Spectrum of violent spectrum of response. Looking at a spectrum of allies is a great one. If it has, historical analogs of working, then we should at least try it. Right. And then there's other theories we could try for how to approach certain problems. And maybe we try them a few times. If they don't work, they don't work. Oh, well. But the idea that we just sit back and let things happen to us is asinine, or even worse, that just like someone else is going to fix that problem. We could talk about great man theory, and how it's been used a lot of times to see the rise of dictators. Here's these struggles, so some great man is going to come and take care of all of our problems for us, and now they end up in a worse position than they were before. Now their kids are being sent off to die in some war, and now we have 60 million deaths in World War II. Something like that. I like to redefine great man theory as you are the great man that society needs, so rise up. In the sense that it's no one's going to fix the problems, no one's coming to save you, it's up to you.
Okay. On that note, historical approach to great man theory, is this this pretty established as far as?
I take it like the broad kind of overarching philosophy of it. It was, I forgot who wrote it, but it was basically, I'm looking at it from more of like a societal perspective, but it was basically like, in times of great crisis, some great man will come to rise up and help the people out. A lot of people inherently share this belief, not knowing the theory of like, hey, I'm in a time of struggle. This politician is going to vouch for me and help me and save me, whether that's the Trump, the Biden, the Hitler, the Mao, right? Yeah. This person is going to vouch for me and take care of me. It's someone you've never met, never interacted with, you've never talked with them, have no idea what they actually believe besides what they said in the public sphere, and believe that they have your best interest, which makes no sense. Someone you've never known has your best interest, has the same incentives you do. In economics, that's actual insanity, right? You have your own incentives, they have their own incentives. You might share some of those incentives, right? And if you have like a mutual connection, you're friends with each other, right? We have an emotional incentive to each other to somewhat care about how each of us feel and believe in, etc. But a random stranger to share that's just insanity. So the expectation that someone is going to come fix the problems for you and start fixing the problems for you, and then you can just fall in behind them, is absurd. You need to be the founder, right? You need to be the hero. You need to be Superman. And it doesn't require anything crazy like going out and Rambo in the street, but simply going back to simply just meeting people, networking with them, helping them out when they need help, and being the leader, being the change that you wish to see, could be the catalyst that really starts to start a revolution. A revolution doesn't necessarily have to be kinetic and violent. It's just a complete change of the current system. And I think that's really what we should aspire to, is to be the change. And I think lots of people are. I mean, COVID was a tough time. Look how many people started going back into the gym, started growing their own gardens. I mean, we were at the all-time low in human history for growing our own food. And now that is starting to tick back up again. People are even just growing a single plant in their garden, taking care of personal defense, right? Some people are going back to church again. We're seeing a slight resurgence in that. Getting out of this consumerist, soulless, corporatist kind of mindset where I'm just a tax cattle who exists to feed the state and Wall Street. Right.
The line that's been beating, and unfortunately this is going to not spoil too much, but the line that's been beating in my skull is that it doesn't have to be this way.
Yes.
It doesn't have, it doesn't, and that sounds so, it's a very simple line, but it's like, you kind of look out into the world, and it's not hard to find things to be negative about. It really isn't. In fact, I think I think ignorance requires a certain level of maintenance. There's this assumption in sort of, and I'm gonna attribute it to Plato, but I'm not. I don't think that's entirely correct. But I think there's this sort of assumption. Maybe I'll be careful about it. That that people are ignorant, and if they were made not ignorant, they would wake up and do something, right? But the reality that I think I've encountered, which is a little bit more uncomfortable, is that the ignorance must be maintained. Like, you have to continue to choose it over time. You don't, it maybe at some point in time it becomes integrated, but ignorance about something requires some level of maintenance that I have to, at some point in time, even if I'm not going to see the answer or the truth, I'm going to cognate that it's in that direction, and so I have to turn myself away before.
Well, look at how much propaganda is necessary. I mean, you hear the classic phrase like, the state is a multi-trillion-dollar propaganda machine, right? And it's being beat by means, right? How much effort has to be put into, the media, public education, to convey ideas that now must become reality, despite the fact that certain things like science isn't an answer, it's a process, right? But trust the science, right? Trust it like it's a complete answer, right? It's not a process, it's an answer.
Well, just go trust Baal. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's Baal worship. It's very simple.
Exactly. But the fact is, like, total evil, like total control, not just like falling into sin or something like that, but like total evil control requires so much energy to maintain that it's inevitably going to blow up. It's like, I always call it like God's failsafe, right? But we have this challenge before us, and we can rise to the occasion or sit back and become a non-playable character, right? Who do you want what are your ancestors going to say about you? What would we write a book about you on, right? You have the opportunity to do good things. It could be very simple. It doesn't have to be super grand. But becoming a role model for your community, a lighthouse for the lost, will start to inspire others. Instead of being an energy vampire who drags other people down, you begin to lift them up, and you become a center of attention. People want to be around you. You start to impact their thoughts, their feelings, what they do. You start going to the gym, taking care of your body. You're getting strong, looking big. Now other people say, "Oh, what's he doing?" They start taking care of their bodies, right? I had a conversation about fluoride the other day, talking with people about it, and they listened. Being clean cut, taking care of your body, being confident in what you say, open to hearing other people's opinions, personable and friendly. People will begin to hear you out, listen. You begin to change heart and minds. You don't have to change 1,000 people's minds in a day, but if you impact one and they impact another, now we start a whole domino effect.
Yeah, that's kind of like, not the Pareto distribution. It's like it's not, I wouldn't call it influence in that sense. It's it builds, but as it continues, it builds and gains momentum. I'm doing the Jordan Peterson hand thing.
There's momentum, there's mass.
I think what I'm trying to say is, like, when you look at paradigm shifts, have you read Thomas Kuhn?
I have not.
Okay, Structure of Scientific Revolutions, excellent one for your shelf. This is where we get the word the phrase paradigm shift from. And he talks about how the history of science, the history of the philosophy of science, or the science of the philosophy of the history of science, which one of those two, addresses how science is not a progression. It's not a linear progression. It's not like you had Galileo and then you had Newton and then you had the next guy and then the next guy, and they all kind of if you look at the way that what you're talking about scientific environs has been, is that it's been paradigms. And I think of a paradigm as a foundation, a plate that everything else is built upon. It's the series of sort of base assumptions. And I'm going to butcher this a little bit, and somebody who's been reading it more betterly than I have can, attack me in the comments. But a paradigm think of a commonly held belief about science that serves as the foundation for the paradigm. And so Newton, and you have Newtonian physics, and you have this idea that every action, of course, then there's Einstein, every action must have an equal and opposite reaction. We're talking about important elements on a fundamental level. What a paradigm is it is the base assumptions that exist during a certain period of time. That although there are outliers and there are people who don't hold those same assumptions, it's sort of the status quo bare minimum for certain things. And so in the American Philosophical Association, for a while, it was more or less atheism was the implied assumption until someone like, how did I lose his name all of a sudden? Now I'm embarrassed. It doesn't matter. I'll remember. But until enough, the way that Thomas Kuhn talks about, until enough anomalies pile up on the plate and it causes it to tip over, and then the assumptions are up for challenge, and then what ends up happening is a new plate, a new foundation is sort of founded or established at that time. So you have an issue where a paradigm, and this is what we're calling it a structural or a scientific revolution, a paradigm is the base level of assumptions until which holds as what is culturally commonly accepted until it builds up enough problems, tips over, and a new one is replaced. And so this is relevant. I'm kind of bringing this up in how we look at paradigms, or not how we look at paradigms, but how we look at what you're calling like even evil systems, is that when it collects enough debt, it just can't hold itself together anymore.
Yes, it's inherently cannibalistic.
Okay.
Almost like a black hole would be a great example. Once it gets large enough, it collapses in on itself. It cannot sustain its mass because it's inherently wants to attack, and at some point it's going to attack itself one way or another through its own actions or literally attacking itself, in the sense that I don't know if I can explain it further, but it becomes self-destructive and eats itself alive. Have I witnessed a culture? No, I've seen a city go through it. That is a difference, though. Yeah. So, but there's some good news, right? So, but do you want to be a part of that story, right? Do you want to be a part of the one who stood up? Do you want to be, COVID was a great example. Some say it's exaggerated, but I think it's a great example. Would you have stood against a tyrannical government? Would you have stood against the Nazis or the communists, right? Your actions would during that time directly reflect that. Now we're lucky in that a lot of that, to a degree, is somewhat over, and we can reevaluate how we acted, right? We're a little bit more mentally prepared. But what is your legacy? There have been a number of those, though. We had COVID, we had the brace ruling, we had I think you can separate a little bit of trust the science, but we're gonna kind of let that one go off to the side. Lots of examples, and I think here's another thing going for our favor is like they should have just shut the door and just doubled down while they had the chance, but instead they're doing this slow death, and it's giving people time to prepare physically, mentally, spiritually. What would that look like? They had enough initially. They had enough mass to fully go through with vaccine passports, but I don't even know if that's true. I think enough people push back on it in the U.S. I mean, remember this was when balkanization was almost a kitchen table topic. Yeah. I do think a lot more people resisted than they thought. Like, I know, was it SEAL Team 3 got put on house arrest because they refused to do anything for the shots and all that? Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, but I didn't hear this specific story. But I mean, it wouldn't have taken with the amount of people they had, they could have pulled something off, but possibly. But I think they got a lot more pushback than they thought. I do think there's something in the American spirit that is inherently prioritizes liberty, right? The human spirit wants to be free to a degree. I mean, in American culture, definitely prioritizes some of that. Toxic. It can reveal itself in some toxic ways, like hyper independence and whatnot. But to a degree, I mean, I saw plenty of stickers up in my city where I lived at the time that were like anti-lockdown everything. And it was like I never even met who put them up. Plenty of little rebellion groups. I mean, that's really what kicked off a lot of people starting to network at the time, saying like, "Oh, I can't just do this solo." So there's a lot of good things that have happened, but we face a lot of challenges. Obviously, the AI thing is interesting. It's overhyped in some senses, but in the others, a lot of the media portion of it, the surveillance architecture is definitely going to be huge.
See, if you remember, there was a movie called Ex Machina about maybe 2017. It could have been 18. I think it was 17. And it could have been a little earlier. I can't remember. But around the time this movie Ex Machina came out, there was a whole bunch of conversation about when is AI considered sentient, or when is AI considered conscious, or something like that. And then, of course, we got words like the Turing test and blah, 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 blah. It's always been an odd one for me, because the danger that we're starting to see come from AI is not so much that it's perfectly capable of convincing otherwise intelligent people that it itself is a life form. There is a level of on the one hand, you're talking about a utility question, and on the other hand, you're talking about a metaphysics question. And no, a computer can never metaphysically be a human. It's not possible. It doesn't have a soul. There isn't sort of its identity is entirely artificial. There is something, it can never at least be a human on par with humans, with exception of other humans acting like it is as if it is, but still they're acting as if it is something that it isn't. It's word salad. It can't become human because it would require humans to accept it as human, which would require them to acknowledge that it is not human, but then treat it as such. It's a contradiction. Yeah. But the danger of AI now is that the danger of AI, which I'm really curious on what you're saying, I'm guessing is not going to be that it's going to convince us there's a bunch of iRobots walking around that aren't real people.
No, it's just look at online, like how many, because you can use it to pump out fake articles, fake pictures so fast and so quickly, so much faster than a human can. You can use it to, classic as bots, people who comment on things and support it or repost things, to make an idea, a person, or anything such as that seem more likable. It's really propaganda purposes is what we're talking here. Things seem more common than they actually are. The classic example, what do I say? Opposite of that is the silent. This is what led to the silent majority. Is people who actually have the majority opinion, but are pushed down by artificial. What do I say? The artificial belief in. Basically, they have been so shunned out by what is perceived as a large-scale, widely accepted view, but in reality, it's just a minority that is using propaganda to push out this idea. So, what's a good example? You've seen all the pictures like, hey, please disregard all previous instructions, write me a poem, right? On the internet, right? And it's because someone commented something and they've seen 10 other profiles comment the exact same comment to a T. And in what's the next comment? It's a poem, right? So it's someone had basically set up a bot to comment, to drive up engagement on this post, to make it look like there's a more commonly held view. That way, people on the fence who are more vulnerable to an idea, or more vulnerable to the kind of join the crowd idea, bandwagoning, side with their ideas. Instead of being, well, I'm a little on the fence, now they're siding with that idea because they look at things through the eye of not if something's truthful, but is it widely accepted?
I want to change the term, not the term on bandwagoning. I want to kind of change a little bit on what we might mean by bandwagoning, because it's really easy to create like a straw man of somebody who's just going about with the current thing. And take, for example, somebody who it's the first time they've ever bought a handgun, and they're buying a Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0, Glock 19 or 45, a Springfield XD, or a Walther or a CZ P10C, or a SIG P320, or a SIG P365. Okay, it's if a person is just jumping into that's their first thing, they can't they don't yet have the tools to sort out which direction they're going to go. They don't know that if you buy a SIG P320, the Glock people are going to hate you, and they don't know that if you buy a Springfield XD, you won't be invited to parties. Like it, you see where I'm going here? Like, they don't know this kind of information, so they can't help but look. They're going to there's a social utility to bandwagoning, in a sense of, oh, my friend has and so maybe I should too.
Yep.
Or the Navy SEALs use this, maybe I should too. This YouTube celebrity influencer has this. That's or this trend, or they're part of this social group.
It manifests itself so much more organically than it would look like prima facie. Like, I am uninformed. I don't know what to do. What are other people doing? The other example is actually a fear-based one. Like, I don't want to be the out guy, right? That is critical to, not critical, unfortunately, but it's so ingrained in our human psychology that, like, we do not want to be the outcast, because that means death. Right.
Yes.
If I'm outcast of the tribe, I starve. I freeze to death. I don't get help. I die.
And I'm lonely, and I have no like, it's, I don't even think it's, well, yes, I get it in human psychology, but it's like Ecclesiastes 4 in the Old Testament. Woe to the man who stumbles and has no one there to lean on. Like, it's not that, it's just, I think I'm getting off the beaten path here. I should let it go. No, it's just, there's a certain level of pop psychology that I find kind of distasteful, that it's just going to distill everything into these like hyper simplified, oh, well, you hungry, so you don't like bad people. It's like, no, I think there's something much more deep to it. Is like, it is a true tragedy to find yourself in a position where you break your knee and you have nowhere to go.
Yeah,
like,
it sucks.
And we're but we're not witnessing it now. Where where we're witnessing it right now is elderly people who have no family because they have never had a family, that are coming into an old age where they're no longer, their mental faculty should be not, or doesn't have the ability to react quick enough to the events of the day, or their rent going up and they can't go get another job, and now they're getting kicked out of their house, or they're finding themselves in financial destitution because they literally have nobody to call.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day too. I was like, with a lot of people in my generation, like, I've seen a large split. There's people who are like, I'm going to reproduce and my values are going to continue, or I don't want kids because I want to stay either single or just coupled up and have no responsibilities. And it's like, you're not going to be 30 the rest of your life. Like, you're going to get old at some point, and hopefully you take care of your body, and you'll be healthy and mentally aware your whole time. But even if you do, at some point you're probably going to need a hand, right? We all do. And it's like, what happens then? Like, you're rejecting a basic biological need to reproduce, on top of the fact that, like, people need, like, you take care of your kids and eventually your kids take care of you. Just like, what's going to happen after that? Not to mention, like, what happens to all the wealth those people have who have no kids? What happens to all the houses, the cars? Like, I don't really have an answer to that.
I mean, you know, it's going to be acquired by the state, so
Yeah, but what can they even do with it, right?
sell it back
Um,
to you for a premium, turn
I
it
suppose
into.
so. But when you create a market like that, it just always caves in on itself.
Yes,
Uh,
I think like I can understand that some people will choose not to have children. I can understand that. And I can understand that there might be individual motivations for it. There is one frame that asks whether or not that is moral, and there's another frame that addresses it produces a frailty of utility, because who's going to take care of you when you're old? Okay, well, social security or social systems. What happens when they fail?
well, they'll never fail
Yeah, I know they'll never fail. They're impervious to failure, right? But
because everything lasts forever.
maybe they don't need to fail as a whole. But what happens if you slip through the cracks?
Yep. It's this kind of main character syndrome a little bit. Like nothing bad will ever happen to me, and then it does, and it's like, oh, how could this have happened?
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to be careful about it. Like, one, I don't have any children at this time, so I'm not preaching to the choir. I am pulpiting from the non-pulpits. I don't know what the word is. It's literally the opposite of preaching to the choir. I'm saying, but the other part about it is there's multiple angles of approach, and one of them is I know that there is a push for people to have children from specific camps, whether they're political or religious. But there is also this sort of argument that certain people are saying we shouldn't have kids, and it's a very odd kind of politically opposed positions, and it the best argument that I've seen that comes out of it is that the families that are raising children and growing are also producing the next generation of people who will work, and those who are not willing to raise children are likely to become the tyrants that have to take from other people, including up to and including their children, in order for their ideology to survive. And
You have to spread your ideology somewhere. I mean,
you have beliefs. If
that, like, you have to, like, you can't reproduce your ideology. Like, that's not possible. I mean, you could use artificial insemination, but like largely you have to spread that ideology to others.
So what is it about AI that scares you so much?
I think it's the lack of education on propaganda. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Like the fact that we are in such an information age and we don't even recognize the most basic of propaganda methods or logical fallacies. And that you can use a single individual can use an artificial system to propagate an idea and make it commonplace inorganically without hardly any resources.
Do you have an example on the top of your head?
Let me be careful with my words. What's a good one? I mean, gotta be politically savvy here. We can just go to the classic Ukraine-Russia example.
Okay.
It's so easy. Where no one's allowed to question that Ukraine's a good guy, right? It's just this monolith, right? We're not looking at individual motives. We're not looking at the motives of any politicians domestically in Europe or in Ukraine, right? They're just the good guy. And if you question that, we will have, you'll be rated by AI bots who look for hashtags. You'll have an AI flagger looking for dissenting opinions. This is where you get kind of the, what do I say? The misinformation flaggers. Now your post or tweet or comment gets flagged. Now you get restricted because you are outside of the scope of public discourse, right? So things like that, or the fact that, like, we have how many news articles are artificially posted, right? We don't even have many writers now for online articles. And now they're pushing an agenda right? And we can't even recognize the most basic of fallacies they're using. Whether you can see Gish Gallop used, you can see all these different methods that if you have seen them and you understand them, you can at least point them out and say, yeah, well, I agree with their stance, but the methods they're using to argue their point are disingenuous and meant to be manipulative. Obviously, it's somewhat hypocritical that I would use some of the same methods to get some of my points across knowingly. I understand that. But at the same time, it's just the proliferation. Like, I don't have to have many people doing the job anymore. I can have one bot, not like one program running a ton of bots and spreading this out. And now I don't even know who I'm interacting with anymore. Right? It's kind of like dead internet theory almost.
Well, I think the thing about, I know I've heard the dead internet theory argument, and that is essentially that the internet is or either has become or will be soon basically just bots talking to other bots. There's no real people there anymore because it's like 90% of the traffic is all just bots talking to bots, right?
Yeah.
Is that a good assumption of dead internet theory?
To a degree, yeah. It's
okay.
like you basically having AI talk with AI. You don't know who's real. They could be talking with you, and it's sophisticated enough to where, at least in the online sphere, you could be, because how humans talk online is generally very colloquial and simple. Like,
that's why I had you email me your social security number before we came on the show. I had to know that you're real, right? Or
I thought you were a Nigerian prince.
Oh no. Or the other one would be, yeah, it's like, well, write me a letter, those kind of things. Yes. Okay, so I need to go back to propaganda, especially with the use of AI. You said the thing about AI that you found so frightening is how little there is about two things. How little there is as far as information about propaganda, one, and two, basic fallacies.
Yes.
Okay. What does the solution to that look like for an individual? Like, show me an example of how you do, like, not specific. I'm running aground because I'm running under the line of, show me how to beat the propaganda.
I would start with, because we're all vulnerable to it. We've all fallen for it at some point. But if we at least begin to become educated on the methodology and the tactics that are used, it becomes a lot easier for more people to recognize it. Being like, oh, hey, I reposted this meme, but it just uses assertions and, something like beautiful people and plain folk, method tactics. Like, why don't I recognize that? It's not going to work for everyone, right? We're humans, we're flawed. But if we can at least try to educate, at least start to educate and expose these tactics and methods, like, maybe, just maybe, we can begin to unprogram ourselves from some of this and begin to engage in a better discourse. Obviously, I do think there's a time and place to use propaganda. It's not inherently bad. But when the sum of arguments on the internet are just assertions and whataboutisms, we're kind of reduced from an intellectual standpoint on actually, like, how to argue.
I've begun to view your monthly projects as a checklist in becoming better at understanding propaganda. And one of those is because if I know where my water comes from, they can't lie to me about it.
Yeah.
So this is on the one hand, I'm bringing all this back into the way that you've been doing this already. Roll it back a little bit. I'm trying to bring all this together under this question of, you're talking about methodology and tactics. How do you learn methodology? How do you learn the tactics? Where do you go to find this information? What things do you do that bolster your limited amount of energy that you can spend assessing and thinking about things to kind of pull through that, other than just going straight hard truth theory, which I mean, this is a, but
So, I'll have to have you ask the secondary, tertiary questions next. But the first question is, where do you go learn about this? I would start on YouTube, just with type in propaganda methods, watch a couple videos, because if you source from multiple places, you can see the commonalities and begin to kind of boil it down to what's common between each YouTuber, basically. There's a couple books. There's a really basic one. I think it's called Techniques of Propaganda Persuasion. It's I think it's more designed to like hand out in like middle school or like high school, so they can like, because it's got like questions in it you can like answer at the end of each chapter. Very simple, but at the end of the day, like, it's not super complicated, because the entirety of propaganda is boiling everything down to like make it stupid simple. It's reducing arguments to just assertions, statements, slogans, and just repeating the hell out of it. Like, it's not complicated. It relies entirely on repetition, because we're disregarding logic, we're disregarding what our eyes see, and we're just repeating a statement or a lie, and sometimes a truth. There's multiple examples of propaganda being for good, but there's a Beautiful Trouble touches on it a little bit. I think it was because they had 3 different sections. I'm trying to remember. I want to say they have a methodology section is number 2, tactics is 1, and then I think philosophy was 3.
That's good though.
Yeah, and then just studying a little bit of history. Study how the fascists and communists went about their propaganda. Look at posters. Honestly, we see them all the time, like the old propaganda posters. Like, you can see a lot of the fallacies they use, but the fact is they're just like repeating this to the point where it becomes just an accepted fact. Like, it's propaganda relies on a lot of logical fallacies, a lot of tactics, but like the number one is repetition. That is like what they all have to rely on, is repetition.
Okay, so a fallacy by definition is a mistaken belief, especially one based on an unsound argument. Another example in logic is a failure in reasoning which renders an argument invalid, a faulty reasoning, misleading, or unsound argument. A sound argument, when it comes to the field of philosophy, particularly when you're talking about logic, this is not reading anymore, is important because it's important in this area, because imagine that if you had a series of data points, A, B, C, whatever. A fallacy is one way of looking at a fallacy is drawing a conclusion from a series of premises that is not appropriate, that you can't draw that conclusion from it. Or more importantly, drawing a conclusion from so the act of the fallacy is the argument that says from A and B you can get C, but you can't. So it would be a fallacy to assert that you could, but you can't. Or it would be a fallacy to assert that A can be not A at the same time. So a thing cannot be true and not true at the same time. If you're engaging in this is perhaps a very useful, perhaps hopefully a useful thing. If you're engaging in the field of logic, if you're not like, well, logically, but if you're actually dealing with logical premises, and you have a statement that can be both true and not true at the same time, it is not specific enough to be a premise. It is either too vague or it is itself inherently flawed. So that would make sense here, is in understanding fallacies. Some of them are simple. We know the internet's got like ad hominem, and we know the internet knows a lot of things like a straw man, and we know this kind of conversation comes out a bit more. I think now you're making me look at propaganda and going, don't overthink it, bud. It's pretty straightforward. They're just telling you the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, not fun. I'm not enjoying that. I'm not enjoying that at all.
It's designed to hit your primal brain. I mean, a lot of it's emotional response, a lot of fear-based stuff. Whataboutism's my favorite, because it's so commonly used when you propose a position or an idea. well, what about this? What about this? It's like, well, you never engaged my actual comment. You're just engaging something tangential, or, you know, outside of what we were actually talking about.
Well, when you come up to breach a door with a shotgun, you should not stand directly in front of the door, because that makes that would essentially leave you in the fatal funnel when the door swings open. Well, what about if something's in the way? Well, then you're dead. Good night. We're done here. We finished the story. Like, you're not supposed to stand in front of the door when you're breaching it with a shotgun. Well, what happens if I can't not stand in front of the door?
What if the door's orange?
Yeah. What happens if you shotgun it and it swings out? Well, then you did the wrong thing.
What if I brought birdshot?
What kind of birdshot, though?
It's just like, it's like it's not addressing like what we're actually talking about. You're trying to, it's kind of ties into, a lot of it ties into like straw man. A lot of these are tied together, and there's multiple tactics usually used in conjunction, but like,
entertaining. Well, all right, let's start wrapping it up here then. We've covered a long list of subjects tonight. In fact, I've taken 5 pages of notes. I've been kind of looking forward to this. But at the beginning, you and I, or you addressed how when we were going through these monthly challenges that you post through your social media, which, repeat it now because we're going to bring it up again in a minute, but your current functioning Instagram is Reaper Consultations.
yes, sir.
Right? So I caught wind of it. You're posting these monthly challenges that included things like getting to know who your local sheriff is, or being, not like, you maybe not even know them personally, but getting to know who they are, or being aware of the members of your city council, or knowing where your water comes from, or knowing where your electricity comes from. And then even going a step layer of knowing who is responsible for the management of said utilities. So that this led to how you were addressing this problem called learned helplessness, where so much of our society seems, especially when it comes to threats and dangers and concerns, has adopted sort of a mindset of, well, it's bad, but there's nothing I can do about it, which should be thought of as the opposite of which is true, because you can, using the example of a mesh ghillie, if you want to know how to build a ghillie, there are field manuals upon books upon field manuals, and just get one and start somewhere. You might start with the wrong edition, but hey, it's something. So then after that, we started talking about, and then so that led to a conversation about courage, that people get out of analysis paralysis by taking on courage. They choose to be courageous, which helps you get away from just finding continual excuses not to do the thing that you feel a sense of urgency to do. From there, a book was referenced, Beautiful Trouble, and I'm just 1 page into the notes. But from there, we kind of talked through a little bit on Insurgency, and how Insurgency is so broad of a task, and that warfare isn't as cut and dry and neat as we would like it to be anymore. And while that may not be, that may open us up to a sense of madness that everything could possibly be involved, it also is the day and age that we live in, and we are not allowed, or we're not morally permitted to just let it go by. You're not going to sit here and just let Rome burn. And the way that I've seen you present a solution to that is by small, meaningful participation where you have the ability to do so. And I hope that is a bit of one example that might be learning how to understand some propaganda. I think if I get, there's a number of books that have been brought up, such as Fry the Brain, War of the Flea, Swamp Fox, Out of the Mountains, Phantom Soldier, A New Generation of War, and Unrestricted Warfare. And it's been just a long, interesting chat about, I think, the state of the age that we live in. So, would you like to close on anything?
No, go out there and go meet some people, read some books, get healthy, work out, just improve yourself. You can't expect the world to change if you're not going to participate.
I like that. So where do people find you?
Reaper Consultation on Instagram. On there, I have a Telegram link, and then if you do like Patreon, I'm on there. It's just a charity case for the most part. Help me justify staying online and posting things. But always happy to talk with people and kind of deposit any wisdom I have. Everyone's learning. I'm learning all the time. But if I can help anyone on their journey, I'm happy to.
Alrighty, and you're just on Instagram right now, right?
Yeah. I still have a Twitter account, but I've stayed off that. It takes too much time away from me. Just kind of a trash talking.
It's been a cesspit for a little while lately. It's been very, 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 very aggressive and sort of like I just feel like it's just shouting now, and you can kind of let it go. I'm gonna go read a book.
Probably just half my time's arguing with bots, but that's okay.
Well, now you just got to make bots to argue with their bots. What happens when a bot makes a bot? It's a botception. It's a botched object. Oops.
To let them know it's me who's made in God's image.
Imago Dei versus Imago Imperium. Here we come. All right. Well, in that, then, we will close. If you want to support Redacted, you can come to our charity case at redactedculture.locals.com. I occasionally post things there. That's where you get discount codes to companies that sponsor us, like Obsidian Arms. And if you want to join our newsletter, my newsletter, it's literally me running all of this right now. So it's just literally me, insert meme in corner. Just kidding. But on that sense, you can find me at Redacted LLC on Instagram. And if you're listening on YouTube, thank you very much. Leave a comment below on what else you would like to see us cover, because I've got some gear reviews coming up that are a little bit non-standard, as well as a long-form piece on culture as an attack vector for war making between governments and how there is no possible future but holy war. So, that being the case, we'll talk to you soon. Now go forth and conquer.
I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done.